Welcome everyone to another video discussion of answer writing program by Vajiram and Ravi. In the month of March, we are going to discuss GS1, specifically history and geography. Today, we are going to see the topic of early nationalism to India's independence of history's topic. We have dedicated 2 days. This is the second day for this topic. Tomorrow onwards, you will be looking at questions from geography. So let us see the overview of those questions for today's session. Firstly, we have a question with respect to non-cooperation movement and how it disrupted the entire freedom struggle and gave a new direction to the same. The second question is with respect to the rise of socialist ideas in 1930s and how it marked the beginning of a new phase in India's struggle for independence. And the third question is with respect to how series of events in 1940s such as Quit India movement, naval mutiny, and INA trials led to convincing of Britishers that Indian masses have developed strong capacity for struggle and sacrifice. So let us start with the very first question. Let's read the question number 1 together. The non-cooperation movement gave a new direction to the freedom struggle of India. Elucidate. Now, if you see this question, you will understand from the question stem, we have to talk about the significant features of non-cooperation movement and how exactly they were able to give the new direction. So if you structure the answer, you have to also understand the directive keyword over here, elucidate. So in the introduction, as we are talking about a pivot point of the freedom struggle, over here you can give either the brief idea about non-cooperation movement or you can talk about what exactly was there before non-cooperation movement, as in pre-non-cooperation movement. In the body, you can divide the topic into 2 parts. In the heading 1, you can talk about how exactly it gave the new direction to the freedom struggle, and as we have to elucidate, which refers to the fact that we have to bring clarity to the idea of the question. So you have 2 options. Firstly, you can expand the heading 1 in a way that you give out around 8 to 10 points, or you can give certain kind of limitations in brief so that you give a very holistic picture of how exactly non-cooperation movement led to a certain directional change for the freedom struggle. And lastly, in the conclusion, we will talk about the significance or the impact of the non-cooperation movement for the entire freedom struggle. So let us start with the introduction. In the introduction, you can briefly talk about the non-cooperation movement, where we can talk about that how it was a series of events which merged with Khilafat movement and was led by Gandhi's ideal principles of satyagraha and non-violence. You can also talk about pre-non-cooperation movement. Over here, you can talk about that how before non-cooperation movement, the India's freedom struggle was limited geographically as well as demographically. So that is something you can talk about in the introduction. In the body, you can transition to the fact that how NCM gave a new direction to the Indian freedom struggle in different ways. Firstly, you can bucket the entire structure in 3 different parameters such as economic, social and political, and within those buckets you can give out the proof points and substantiation. For economic, you can talk about it how it expanded the idea of Swadeshi movement and led to boycott of different kind of British goods. Over here we are looking at fact that now Indian masses have understood the economic structures that British created to trap the Indian society. So over here we are looking at empowerment of the indigenization of Indian society. Second is with respect to the social parameter, where we can talk about it how it led to emphasis of constructive program. Such constructive program helped with respect to the empowerment of the underprivileged, as well as it also increased the social cohesion. The second, which is the most important aspect of the non-cooperation movement, was the fact that it was a mass movement. Now the participation was not limited to certain geographies or certain demographies, the social indicators as in the elites, but rather it was a very holistic movement where different classes, different castes and genders participated for the movement. Third, with respect to the social parameter, is promotion of Hindu-Muslim unity. We understand that it merged with Khilafat movement. Over here you can understand that how it led to certain kind of religious cohesion as well. The third bucket we are talking about is with respect to the political idea. Over here we can see that how it destabilized the colonial authority. When you have a movement which is of such a long duration, you will understand that people will definitely have certain kind of different idea with respect to the power balance, and thus we saw that how colonial authority, the colonial power structure was challenged through such kind of movement. We are looking at boycotts, we are looking at certain kind of non-cooperation that definitely impacted how now the British will view Indian masses. The another point with respect to the political idea is elevation of Gandhi's leadership. Non-cooperation movement gave a new direction. Over here we are looking at how Gandhi ji gave a new type of leadership where the main parameters were with respect to satyagraha and non-violence. It also entrusted how the masses can also be very crucial for the entire freedom struggle. And lastly, it helped with respect to evolution of Congress's goal. Over here we are focusing on a single party which was kind of very impactful at that time. So we are looking at how the goals were also changed during that phase, and inculcation of masses along with different ideas helped the expansion of what goals should be for the India's freedom. So these are the kind of new directional changes that non-cooperation movement gave, but there were certain limitations as well. Now we have to elucidate how it was a pivotal point. So we will also enlist all the challenges with respect to the non-cooperation movement. So you can give the heading 2, where you can talk about the challenges faced during non-cooperation movement. Firstly, when it merged with the Khilafat issue, it led to certain degree of communal color, and we can see at different parts of the nation that there were certain instances of disharmony as well. Next is with respect to the limited reach. Despite being a mass mobilization, we have looked at how the rural population as well as population from the princely state were not entirely participated for such kind of movement. Third is with respect to lack of clear goals. We have seen that how different institutions, how different groupings perceive the entire movement in different way. There were certain instances which were very proactive, such as student movement, whereas certain sections such as government officials, lawyers, they were not exactly participating in the same fashion. And lastly, there were differences. We have seen that Gandhi's entire movement was about non-violence and satyagraha, but however there were certain instances such as labor strikes in Assam which took a violent turn, and also we have to understand that the entire movement got halted because of Chori Chora incident of 1922. So these are the kind of challenges with respect to the non-cooperation movement, and in the conclusion you have the opportunity to talk about that despite those challenges, non-cooperation movement helped with respect to generating and spreading the anti-imperialistic consciousness. Over here we are looking at the fact that now people are aware of the social, economical and political agenda of the imperials. So this is something with which you can conclude your question number 1. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate all this point in our answer writing practice. Firstly, in the introduction, you can either give a brief about the non-cooperation movement, you can talk about significant features of the same, you can also talk about it how it was at the backdrop of Jallianwala Bagh massacre. At the same time, you can also give certain features that how pre-non-cooperation movement, the freedom struggle of India was having a different kind of direction, and how it ensured, the non-cooperation movement ensured that the directional change was required, and thus it proved to be a very impactful movement. The next you can talk about in the heading 1, the different directional changes along with the expansion of those ideas. As we discussed, you can bucket the same in 3 different parameters of political, economical as well as social, and expand and substantiate with examples. In the second heading, you can list down the challenges over here so that you can elucidate the idea behind the question stem. And then finally, in the conclusion, you can bring out the significance that how it helped with respect to creation of awareness with respect to anti-imperialistic consciousness. So this is all for question number 1. Let us see question number 2. Let's read question number 2 together. Describe how the rise of socialist ideas in 1930s marked the beginning of a new phase in India's struggle for independence. Now again, we have to see that this question is demanding very specific idea about rise of socialist ideas in 1930s and how it was kind of a pivotal point. It disrupted the entire India's struggle for independence and led to a new phase for this entire movement. So the question is very clear, we have to describe. Now when you have giving a specific directive described, you have to go in depth and provide proof points for the same. In elucidation, we saw that how we need to provide a clear picture, and whenever you are providing a clear picture, it's very much necessary that you give certain instances of limitation as well. Over here, we are going to delve into only one heading of the body part, which will give proof points with respect to the rise of socialist ideas and how it disrupted with respect to the India's freedom struggle. In the introduction, you can provide context over here, as in why there was need for such kind of socialist ideas and how exactly that those ideas came into the picture. In the conclusion, you can give out the significance of the rise of socialist idea. So that is how you will structure. Let us start with the introduction. In the introduction, you can provide context. You can talk about that how the socialism, the rise in socialism throughout the globe was against the imperialistic colonialism, and thus it provided certain kind of roots for Indian struggle as well. You can also talk about that how in 1930s the entire world witnessed instances such as Great Depression. We have already seen that how Russian Revolution is transforming the USSR, and those are the kind of international influence also impacted India's socialism phenomena. So that is something you can inculcate in the introduction. In the body, you can give out a heading that how exactly the socialist ideas in 1930s began a new phase in India's struggle for independence. Over here, you have to talk about how different kind of parameters related to socialism were inculcated in the philosophy behind the India's freedom struggle. Firstly, you can talk about mass mobilization strategy. Now, in previous question, we have already seen that how NCM was a kind of a tipping point where we witnessed mass mobilization, but despite that, there were certain instances like rural population was not exactly inculcated in the entire movement. We have also seen that how princely state population were also not part of it, but through the rise of socialistic ideas and the leaders who propagated those ideas, we are witnessing leaders such as Nehru who championed the causes of the masses and allowed class organizations like Kisan Sabha, as in peasant organizations, and trade unions with respect to the labor. So different classes, different caste and genders were again inculcated in the India's freedom struggle movement. Second is with respect to the continuous confrontation with imperialism. Previously in NCM, we saw that how Gandhi's idea was about not a continuous struggle, but rather with breaks. But with the rise of socialist idea, it was considered that through continuous confrontation, they can weaken the colonials and ensure India's right place. So that is something you can inculcate for this second point. The third is we have also seen establishment of Congress Socialist Party, which was kind of a part of the Indian National Congress and helped with respect to decentralization and empowering local entity. Over here, we are looking at certain kind of political empowerment through this kind of organization. We are also looking at how opposition to office acceptance was also in place through the rise of socialist idea. We have seen that how those leaders ensure that Indian masses get the right way of the right, and thus we are looking at this kind of opposition also. Again, as we have to expand, this is continuation of the heading 1 only. So next point is with respect to the support for labor unionism. We have seen that how that rise of socialism also impacted different aspects of mass mobilization, and one of the part was support for the labor, the trade unions. Then we have seen reform work under the Congress ministry. We have seen that how reforms such as land reforms, debt relief were provided to ensure that masses are not in a way limited to only certain kind of classes. Then we have seen revival of Communist Party in 1933. It provided a greater acceptance, greater degree of acceptance in the Indian society. We have seen certain sessions of Indian National Congress like Faizpur session, where we have seen that there were certain kind of alignment of Congress goal with different sections of the society. And lastly, you can talk about formation of Forward Bloc, which was a left-wing element led by Subhash Chandra Bose, which was again in lines with the rise of socialism in Indian society. So these are the kind of pivotal points that the rise of socialist idea helped with respect to marking a different phase for India's freedom struggle. Lastly, in the conclusion over here, you have the opportunity to talk about the impact of socialist idea. Over here, you can talk about it through the rise of socialistic idea. The Indian national movement inculcated socio-economic parameters which reflected the masses, and thereby it augmented the degree of democracy in the Indian society. So this is how you can talk about that, how socialism helped with respect to resource distribution post independence as well. So these are the kind of proof points that you can inculcate for question number 2's conclusion. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. Firstly, in the introduction, you can provide the context over here. We can provide certain global instances as well that led to rise in socialist idea in India and how it provided a different kind of phase for the Indian struggles for freedom. Then you can provide the proof points for the same in the heading 1. Now, as we have understood that this is the only heading, we have to expand the same with different proof points. And lastly, in the conclusion, you can talk about the significance of the rise of socialist idea for India as well as post-independent India, Indian movement as well as post-independent India. So this is something for question number 2. Let us see question number 3. Let's read the question number 3 together. A series of mass upheavals ranging from Quit India movement to naval mutiny convinced the British that Indian masses has developed a strong capacity for struggle and sacrifice. Elucidate. Now again over here we have to see that the question is talking about that how events in 1940s such as Quit India movement, naval mutiny, INA trials impacted the conscience of British rulers in a way that they were now in a kind of a disharmony that Indian masses have already developed a strong capacity for struggle and sacrifice, and they must now take certain decisions as in to provide freedom for the nation. So this is something and you can provide as a context for the introduction. In the body part, you can list down in the heading 1 different series of events, as in we have to elucidate what were the different events, and in the heading 2 you can provide the impact of such events. So events and impact of event, and in the conclusion you can list down the significance as in what ultimately happened because of this kind of events in 1940s. So that is something as a structure for the answer. In the context, as we mentioned, you can provide that how 1940s was a turbulent period of time where there were so many events which disrupted the entire idea of Indian national movement and impacted how the British are now going to move ahead. So that is something as a context for the introduction you can inculcate in the introduction. In the body, as we have to elucidate, we have to make clear of the statement. We will in the heading 1 talk about the key activities in the final phase of Indian freedom struggle. Firstly, we have Quit India movement, which was suppressed by British, but it definitely developed a certain degree of urgency in the Indian masses with respect to India's freedom. The second is with respect to the formation of Indian National Army. Now, the formation as well as the leadership of certain personalities helped with respect to the pressure that Britishers were now facing from the global leaders. The third is with respect to the INA prisoner trial, which witnessed a unity of different sections of the society against Britishers. Then we have Royal Naval Mutiny. This is something where a certain pillar of their military was now opposing different kind of issues, and they were protesting against discrimination. And lastly, we have also sporadic militant activities led by different personalities that again impacted how the 1940s was disrupted. In the heading 2, you can list down that those events were significant in what capacity, what was the nature of those events, as we have to talk about that why exactly those events created certain kind of change of mind for the British. Firstly, the participation was broad. We are overlooking here masses from the British provinces as well as from the princely state. We are also looking at how the mutiny from the military side is also impacting the consciousness of British. Then we are talking about public uprising. We are looking at certain instances where there are parallel governments. Then we have underground resistance, which again impacted the administration of British. Then we have establishment of parallel government, again similar thing from the public uprising, that those parallel government definitely challenged the authority of the Britishers. And lastly, resistance to repression, like we witness that how towards the end there were active resistance towards any kind of repression from the British side. So this is something you can talk about as the nature of activity. In the heading 2, in the conclusion, you can talk about that how those series ultimately led to the freedom of India in 1947, and thus this was the way through which have uh, British were convinced in a way that Indian masses have now developed a strong capacity for struggle and sacrifice. So that is all for question number 3's conclusion. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. In the introduction, we can provide the context. In the body, in the heading 1, you can list down the key activities in the final phase and nature of the activities in the heading 2, and lastly the ultimate impact of those activities and how it ultimately led to India's freedom. So that is all for question number 3 and for today's session. So keep writing, and thank you so much.